Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Ben Eubanks. Ben is a writer, speaker, and researcher living in Huntsville, Alabama. His work has been featured in numerous industry publications, and his books have been cited by some of the world's most prestigious universities as a method for instructing the next generation of HR professional. Ben spends his days as the Chief Research Officer for Lighthouse Research Advisory, a firm that examines and delivers groundbreaking insights on the HR technology market, as well as workforce trends in hiring, training, retention, and more. Ben and I, as you'll hear in this conversation, we connected almost 2 years before this interview was actually done. And I was really fascinated then on one of his books, Talent Scarcity, and this concept that we're not growing our workforce. We are actually shrinking or staying flat as a workforce in the United States and in a lot of other developing countries around the world. And the implications of this we're often not talking about. Even though we had to wait 2 years to do this, it's only 2 years further into this journey that is going to last for the foreseeable future. It is something that we're going to have to deal with as companies, as leaders, when it becomes more and more and more taxing to get people on board, and the pools from which we're hiring just aren't going to be there in the ways that they have been in the past. If that sounds all doom and gloom, don't worry. I think Ben is an optimist and has a lot of good insights into how companies are starting to evolve and how organizations like yours can evolve to meet this future. This episode is a little bit different in how it starts, in that I had hit record and he just started talking and kind of explaining his background. And I was like, let's just jump in. Let's just go. And so we kind of just take the conversation and run with it. So that's what you're going to jump into. Here is my conversation with Ben Eubanks. I know you do these. I know you've done these. I just always say, like, don't worry if you lose your train of thought. I inevitably do about once an episode. Mm-hmm. If you say something, you're like, oops, shouldn't have said that client name. We'll just bleep it or cut it or whatever. So no worries on any of that.
If anything I ever said was there bleeped, people would not believe it. It's a running joke in our house that I've cussed once in my life on accident, and my wife still picks on me about it, like 10 years, 15 years later.
Oh,
so
that's funny.
I bleep. I'm like, don't wonder what was behind that. So,
That's funny. Only one curse word in your whole life, huh?
Really? Well, one that anybody knows about.
Yeah, good for you.
One that my wife knows about that she harps on me for and picks on me for occasionally. But
you're a better man than I am.
Well, it was one of those things. I was like, this is lazy. And so when I was in sports and stuff in high school, and when I became when I was the team captain for the wrestling team, I was like, not allowed in the wrestling room. You're going to be a little smart. You're going to try harder than that. You got to try harder on the mat, try harder with your brain, and challenging people to not just blah, whatever it is, but creative. Come on, work at this. You'll have more fun with it, and it'll mean something more to the person on the receiving end if you really wanted to.
I agree with that. I also think there can be a place where it can grab attention.
It can, yes. It's almost to the point now where people will do it for attention, even when there's not anything reasonably useful behind it.
Yeah. I actually, a guy, former podcast guest that I've kind of become friendly with, he just posted, he's all about hype, and he's like studied hype and how to use it for good instead of to be a serial killer or a politician or a cult leader. But he posted something this week that was talking about Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And he was like, that book was great and had all these great insights in it and was like a refreshingly new thing. But since then, you can walk through like any airport library or bookstore, and there's like all these books dropping F-bombs and all kinds of stuff on the titles that would make your grandma blush. And it's like, don't be the next Mark Manson. Figure out the way to say something interesting in a way that's authentic to you. Like that was authentic to him, and he had something unique to say. Find the way to say it that's unique. Anyway, that's not the conversation we're going to have today.
No, but still, it comes back to that's part of what I think I bring to the conversation is I've been an HR leader. I've been a recruiter. We now have access to the research. And so all those times where I was like, man, I wonder what this is. I don't know. I'll just get back to work. now when I have one of those questions myself, or I talk to someone, I spoke to a guy yesterday. He's like, we're at 7,000 employees. The goal is for us to be at about double that at the end of next year. How are we going to do that? Like, well, I don't know. I'm going to ask some questions in the data to try to figure that one out. And so like, I love now having the superpower of being able to chime in with that when I can. And I'll try to weave that in today to make it relevant, practical, all that good stuff.
Perfect. Well, I know I said that we're recording, but we're not going to use this, but I think that was a great intro. So if you're good with it, let's just rock and roll.
Let's go for it.
All right. So you just gave a nice little intro to yourself there. I want to talk today a lot about how that work applies to the book that you wrote, Talent Scarcity, and the work that you've been doing since that book came out. Because we had actually talked, I think it was 2 years ago, about having this conversation. And for various reasons, you got very busy and we put it off. But I'm glad that you're back now. And it's not like the topic is going away. Like this is something that is going to continue to evolve and we're going to continue to deal with. So can you just set up the book, why you felt the need to write it and what the key message is in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two versions of this answer. So one is I speak every year at dozens of events in person, virtually. And I kept hearing about people of all different industries, different company sizes, everything else about challenges with hiring. One of my favorite questions to ask when I go and talk about recruiting is, what's the hardest job you have to fill? And I do it as an object lesson because you'll hear someone say, we can't find highly specialized physicians for this practice. And someone right next to them says, well, I can't find a salesperson. And the next person in line says, I can't find someone that's doing general labor and digging ditches and just, whatever else. And so there's this broad range. The other side of that, though, is that you and I and pretty much everybody listening here probably went to a restaurant sometime in the last 2 years and sat down like, hey, it's half empty. We're going to get a seat. And like, no, it's 45-minute wait. But I see empty booths right there. Yeah, but we're short on staff. And so after that, those two things sort of combined together, and I kept hearing those both at the same time over and over again. So I wanted to understand why that was. Is it this bubble that's going to burst? Is it something, the longer term trend? And it really helped me to uncover some of the key concepts in the book, Talent Scarcity, not just to bring a doom cloud and a rain cloud to people, but because there is some stuff in there that is definitely rainy and unpleasant, but to also say, if this is true, what do we do about it? What do we do next to try to solve for this as employers?
Yeah, because that's the thing, right? Like you can look at the future and you could shape it however you want to shape it, right? Because inevitably change is going to happen. And so you can look at that and go, well, the world is changing. Let's throw up our hands. We're screwed. Or you can look and go, hey, the world's changing. We need to adapt. Let's figure out how we need to adapt and let's meet this thing head on and let's go be successful. And so I think we all have that choice.
Yes. The HR and talent leaders, the business leaders that I interact with on a regular basis, and probably you could say the same, they're not that kind of, oh, there's a challenge. How do I avoid? How do I circumvent? How do I skirt? But it's like run headfirst into it. Let's take this on. Let's solve it and let's move on because we've got other good stuff to be doing. And this is just taking away from our ability to focus on that and get it done.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of the HR leaders that I know are so busy with the tsunami of work that has been placed on that department right now that they're like, yes, thank you. I see that these are challenges. I'm working through my long to-do list and I will get to them when I can. But it can be hard, especially what we're going to dive into and talk about today, such a long-term sort of evolving challenge. I think those are the ones that are really hard to deal with because there's no immediate case until it's too late.
Yes. So as I was doing the research for the book, I read 2 other books in prep for that, and they were not HR books. They're back there somewhere on my shelf. And one of them is called The Empty Cradle, which is creepy and weird. The other one's a little bit more of a play on words, but still weird. It's called What to Expect When No One's Expecting. And those 2 books looked at this broad population shift that's happened, the demographics that have shifted over the last couple of decades. And they started looking at, okay, what does this mean for the future? What's next? And so, as you said, like we don't always know the future, but you can see these long-term trends and it's telling us directly, this is where we're going unless we make a detour, make a change. Those books help to fuel some of the research around what this looks like demographically. So we have this, some people call it the demographic drought. Some call it the graying of the workforce, but we have fewer people being born and we have more people that are on the retirement age. And so those 2 ends at a very simple sort of use case there are stretching the ability to hire the right people because some of the best ones we would have hired 2 years ago are now retired. And some of the ones that we could have hired were never even born because they haven't been around. We've not kept up with the birth rate, we'll say. And so those things create challenges for us. And as you said, it's not an immediate today challenge. When someone wasn't born 20 years ago, no one said, oh no, sound the alarm. But today, when those people are not available for us to tap into and bring on to our team, suddenly we start feeling that and looking around like, what's happening here? Because you just suddenly kind of realize in that moment that something is not right.
Yeah. And can you just explain what has been happening with the birth rate in America and other developed countries?
Absolutely. So I don't know if anyone heard the sound in 1970, this like boom sound, because that was the last time the U.S. was at replacement rates. We were producing enough people to keep our population at a steady pace in 1970. Ever since then, the replacement rate, the birth rate for the U.S. has fallen steadily. And so the fertility rate for a country needs to be 2.3 for them to maintain the population. Today, it's about 1.6 to 1.8. So definitely lower than that. For those of you that are hearing that and thinking, yeah, but hasn't the country grown? Yes, it has. And it has through immigration. People were importing people into the country, importing talent and families. And that's allowed us to keep those numbers at a pretty high rate. Countries around the world eventually are going to say, hey, wait a minute, you can't have our people anymore when they start to struggle with this thing. So as an example of that, Japan is one of the economies in the world most affected by this. They currently do not have enough working age people to provide Social Security for their retirement age population. It's creating these real challenges there, and it's creating unique, interesting jobs too. Like you can hire someone just to come sit with you if you're lonely because people are old enough. They have this money saved up and they can do those sorts of things. But the challenge there is what we are facing long term if we don't do something different. The only countries in the world that have a fertility rate higher than the replacement rate are developing countries, like those in Africa. India was above it for a while. Now they're starting to trend down towards about 2. So they're below the replacement
really?
rate. Yes. So
interesting.
Some real things on the horizon there. China had their one-child policy for a long time and now are realizing that was not a good plan. It was very short-sighted because they don't have enough people for their future, and they're trying to turn that around. And in the books I mentioned earlier, like countries like Russia said, if we're going to be a world power, we need more people. And so they try to encourage us through all these government initiatives, everything else. China's trying that. Other countries are trying that. And they're realizing it's really hard to get people to make more children. It's hard to reverse that once it's begun.
Yeah. And so what's the implication of that then? Because, I mean, great, like we all think of, okay, well, we can't fund Social Security and that's going to be terrible. But there's way more implications than that.
Yes.
To like the actual active workforce and what it means to be like working and growing and profitable and the stock market and like GDP, like there's a lot more implications than just, well, our old people aren't going to get the same Social Security that we promised them.
Yeah. So a couple of things. Number one, more heavy reliance on automation to get things done. All this conversation around AI in the marketplace, that's a forerunner of what's to come because we're going to see more and more need to do that, not for fun, not for joy, not for just for profit, but because we have to, because we don't have enough people to do those tasks. We're seeing big shifts around a lack of skills in key areas. Like the World Economic Forum is trying to reskill 1 billion people by 2030 because the people they're targeting don't have the skills necessary to survive in a digital era. And it's like a microcosm of that. AT&T, they're spending $1 billion as a company to reskill over 100,000 employees for that same thing. They have over 100,000 people that work at AT&T are really great and very skilled in analog telecommunications technology, which is now becoming obsolete. And so they were like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about this? We can just fire them all and hire new ones, or we can start adapting them and reskilling them. So we're seeing those sorts of pressures there. And really the bottom line is when you go into that restaurant or you are trying to schedule with your dentist or whatever else, whatever those things happen to be, we're seeing a lack of people to do all kinds of work. That's what we should expect more of in the future. And it's going to create these real challenges if there are scarcities in key areas that are a problem. I was meeting with a hospital in Montreal last year, and I spoke about some of these concepts in the Talent Scarcity book. And then their CEO got up and said, listen, our strengths and weaknesses as an organization, this is our SWOT analysis. And half of the threats to the long-term survivability of the business came down to a lack of skills and nursing and in heart health and these other areas of the business. And they said these lack of talent areas are going to sink us if we don't do something about it.
Yeah. So one question I want to ask first, and this might be a little jarring because we've kind of already gotten past it, but I just wanted to highlight it because you highlighted it in the book. What is the difference between a scarcity and a shortage?
I wanted to be an economist and decided to go in HR, but like economist was my backup career. And so the concept of talking about either of those excites me. So a shortage is something like when the pandemic started and no one could buy toilet paper, there was a shortage of toilet paper, but it wasn't a permanent thing. It wasn't long-term. A few weeks later, everyone's good to go. But there was a short-term shortage that created strain on people. If this was just a shortage of talent in one area or another, or a certain type of skill, we could get to that solution with a little bit of investment, a little bit of attention and effort. But a scarcity is much deeper, much longer term, and requires a much different type of intervention if we're going to have any solution or hope of solving it. And I don't want to spoil any of the fun of the conversation today, but I don't have a secret way to make everyone have more babies. I don't have a secret way to produce more people and create them. So when I talk about this, it's what can you do as a leader in your business to attract the right kind of people, to make sure you're keeping the ones you have, because it's going to become more and more important and urgent long term as we're trying to solve this. It's going to become a strategic and competitive differentiator for the best companies, or the ones that can attract, find, and keep the right people.
Yeah, it's laughing like, well, what's the solution? It's like, well, everyone should go have one more kid.
Listen, okay, 5 kids over here. Okay, I'm doing my part.
Our
family is trying our best to keep things afloat. So everybody else needs to pick up the slack.
I have 2, and my wife gets really, really sick when she's pregnant, and we're good at 2. But I've had this thought because I've been paying attention to this for the last couple of years. And it's
0.3 more. We're going to get 0.3 children, and then we'll be good to go.
Like, yeah, well, that's funny. However you feel about Elon Musk, like, he's got a lot of children, and one of the reasons is this. Like, he's been quoted as saying that the world needs more people, and he's pretty smart, and so why not throw his genes into the gene pool?
Interesting.
He's an innovative thinker.
I did not know that out there. Okay, he's known for lots of things, including father. Okay.
Yeah, I think he has 8 to 10 children.
Okay, now I feel like
7 to 10.
I feel like such a loser now, man.
Yeah. There's always someone with more. It's not a comparison.
Yes.
So back to the hospital that you were talking to, the hospital system, right?
Yes.
Like, there are jobs today that we need people to do. Nursing, having somebody who can go in and work with a patient, doctors who can help diagnose things that are wrong. Now, there are some like creative ways that are emerging where we can use AI or different technologies to make their jobs more efficient. But like, are you seeing companies approaching this today as like, well, we just need to be more competitive, and so we need to go find the people we need? Or are they starting to say, we need to start giving up the way that we're doing work today and finding new ways to do work? Like, those to me seem like 2 camps, and they don't need to necessarily be mutually exclusive, but I'm curious just what you're seeing in the market between those 2 thought processes.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, there's a story I wrote about in the book on AI that I wrote that was both enlightening and a little bit concerning. And there's a healthcare company out in California, and they've started using, because of a shortage and just the cost of having doctors on staff 24/7, they started using a doctor like Teledoc, but it's in the hospital. So they have this robot that moves around. It's got the doc's camera so you can see and talk to the patient, interact with them, but they're staying in one place so they can move these around, turn on the robot wherever they need to be. And it sort of allows them to be a little more omnipresent. And great idea, good, probably cost savings over time for those and all these other sorts of things. But the story that hit the headlines wasn't, look at the innovation, look how, incredible this is. The story was the robot rolls in the room and the doctor tells the family, hey, I'm sorry, but this person is not going to make it. The test just came back. They're going to pass away. And the firestorm around that was, this is news that should have been delivered in person. And there may come a time where we physically can't do that. We'll have the big Hero 6 Baymax personal healthcare companion to come along and say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your pain? But at this point, we still expect and hope to see a human in the mix. So that's sort of the tug of war that we're at. Is it's not just about the companies want to do this or not, But are you willing to put up with whatever potential backlash comes if you don't have a human there? There was a story in the news recently about a financial services company. They replaced their entire customer service center, 800 people, with an AI chatbot. And they were proudly proclaiming that in the news. Look at what we've done here. It's going to help us keep costs down and so on. But for any one of us who've ever tried to go through one of those automated systems and wanted to punch ourselves in the face,
oh God,
that's what I'm thinking about. I'm picturing that immediately when I see that headline is how many of their customers are going to say, I'm done here. I'm out. So it's going to be this sort of tug of war between expectations, what we want, and that. Now, we saw some of this happen when any of our banks said, hey, listen, we're putting this ATM out here. There are some people that said, I'm going to keep coming in here and seeing this person face to face because they know my kids and because I know them. I want to see them and keep that connection alive. But over time, that has withered away. And there are some banks that are ATM only. There's a place in my town where it's just go to the ATM and do your stuff.
Yeah,
but
I bank with an online bank only. So there are no locations that I can go to.
Absolutely. Well, they're like, what's the address of the bank? I have to fill a form out. I'm like, I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Let me get my credit card or my checkbook out and see what that address is. Yeah.
Checkbook. What is this thing that you speak of?
Yeah, I do still have a checkbook. I don't balance it though, although I was taught in school how to do that.
Minor details.
Yeah. But that is a good point. And that happened with seatbelts, right? Like there are some hilarious videos out there of people being upset because their kids can't sit without a seatbelt in the front seat. And there are some wild products that you can go back and find advertisements for. There was one that was a hammock that you could set up in the back seat of your car for your little kids. And it's just like, oh my God, how terrible an idea that is. But, and people were pissed when that came out. And yet, now that's the standard because it's safer and it's not that intrusive after all. And so it's interesting though, because there will be backlash. And so everybody's just going to have to deal with this backlash, and you're going to have to, we're not going to be able to make the large shifts that we're going to need to make because humans just aren't good at adapting that quickly.
One of the answers to that is transparency. So if you go to a restaurant in some places and you're like, wow, that bill's more than I thought it was. And at the bottom, like, hey, our employee benefit, surcharge or whatever else, they put those things on there. So you see, oh, look, this is where that's coming from.
Yeah.
You may not be happy with it, but at least you understand. And in the case of that hospital, one of the things they could be telling their people when they're working with them, probably at the opportune time, is, hey, listen, when we're billing, our billing is about 10% less than the industry average because we use some of these things. But the trade-off is there's going to be a little less human interaction for some times where you might prefer that.
Yeah.
And we just want you to understand that in advance. Again,
or in that case, even you may actually get more time with the doctor because they don't have to be walking the hallways, going back and forth. They can just be sitting in one place, click off with you and click on with the next person. And you can get more time with each doc. I mean, I don't know, but yeah, communicate. I mean, again, we're all humans. Communication is like the underlying skill that is most important in everything. I mean, I've done 200 episodes of a podcast on humans at work. Like that is one of the single biggest lessons is it all comes down to how and what we communicate. In your head, you're always doing this weighing of, is the benefit more than the cost to me? And the cost is less human. The benefit could be financial. It could be more time, as you said. It could be a lot of things. But if we're not making those clear, transparent, communicating those, then we're missing a chance. That applies in employee benefits. That applies in a ton of different areas. We've got to make that case. And go back to some of the conversation already around hiring as an example. We may say, listen, we don't have as many recruiters on our team because we don't want to staff up and lay them all off again if things slow down. So we do use some automated tools to balance that out. But when you talk with someone, you are going to get a deeper conversation. We'll know more about you because we're using these tools to understand and maybe assess your competencies. So they're not going to ask you the same 4 questions every other person did. They'll ask you something specific to you. Yeah. So there are some ways it takes effort though to position that. To your comment there, it takes effort. It seems like in order to meet this future and sustain successfully, we're all going to have to be better at the things that we do, because it's the days of like, oh, well, I just want to sell this product, so I'll go talk to some people who need it and we'll sell it. And we'll have some people service that. Like, you can't just like slap a business together like that anymore. It doesn't seem. Business leaders have to be human experts and have to be communication experts and have to be negotiation experts and have to be technology experts. And we have to have all of these skill sets, and they have to be at a pretty high level. And then we have to be really thoughtful about what is the experience we're creating for our people? What is the experience we're creating for our customers? How can we be as efficient as possible without losing the humanity? Like, there's so much nuance to solving this problem the right way that it seems like we all just are going to have to level our game up significantly.
I think there are some companies that can win through sheer brute force, but it's expensive, it's time consuming, and it burns people out. And so even people who are doing that, I'm going to sell, hard sell until someone says yes, those people turn over at a tremendous rate compared to someone who is well cared for, as you were saying, and all those pieces there. So yeah, I would agree with that for sure, that it's going to require that. That's an interesting way of putting it.
Where does the gig economy play into all this?
So a couple of things on the gig economy. Number one, the research varies depending on which survey you look at, but about 1 in 3 U.S. workers has a side hustle. And that number really ticked up a lot. Some of it slacked off, but it ticked up a lot back when COVID happened, and people realized how that steady job at that big company that was always going to be safe, that went away almost overnight. And people realized, oh, wow, maybe should be more responsible for or more careful about having all my eggs in one basket employer-wise. So people really leaned into that. Some of the things that we think of when we think of the gig economy, like the Ubers and the, Grubhubs and all those sorts of things where we see those things as consumers, those still make up a pretty tiny percentage of the overall gig economy that's happening in the world out there. But overall, when people look at that, they're looking at it for flexibility. There was a study done by JP Morgan a couple of years ago where they looked at the actual data from people using bank accounts there. And they could see which ones are actually getting compensated by an Uber, a Lyft, one of the other platforms, or even some of the ones that were around like an Airbnb where they're renting something out. And what they found were the people who were doing work around Uber, Lyft, those sorts of things where it's on the side as a service. Those people were doing it in order to make ends meet in many cases, just to try to get that done. The people that are using services like Airbnb or VRBO and some of those others that are renting out something they had, those people were doing it as a way to make extra income, but they were already making enough to get by based on some of their standards. So they were looking at even the way people approach the gig economy is different. Some people are like, I want extra cash. Others are, I need to make sure my kids can eat on Friday.
Yeah.
And so that's changed some of those sorts of things, but it's definitely blown up a lot. If you look at the chart, the actual data from the U.S. government on new business starts, it's this number here, and then COVID hits and it goes off the chart, and it still stayed pegged out pretty high compared to historical numbers for the 3-4 years after that.
Yeah. What about the higher end of the gig economy? Like, I don't know. In the HR community that I'm a part of, I've noticed a huge swing into fractional HR work.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, like, I've read stuff that could be the way that like the future of work is, that there are no employees and everybody's contracted to do project after project. Like, just curious what you're seeing on that more like, I don't know, quote unquote higher end or like higher comped end.
Yeah. More specialized, essentially, right? Specialized skills, because I can't be a marketing fractional executive, then I could be one for sales, but I could be for HR potentially, right? So the skills are more specialized. So a couple of things occur to me there. There's a company that I ran across a few years ago. They're called Talent, and they had collected over 100,000 very specialized consultants in their database. And so, for example, when Shell was building out some stuff internally, they said, we need to partner with some external consultants. And they said, okay, well, here's the library of the ones you can have access to, tens of thousands. Which ones do you want? Instead of saying, who are the 3 to 5 consultants who do this? It was this huge library. And so we're seeing those platforms curating that and creating more access that wasn't there before, which is great, that transparency. The other piece of that, though, is we're seeing it in other areas, like comes like Top Talent and others say, well, do you want the top 2% or 3%, I don't know what the number it is, of developers, software developers, and giving people a chance to access that population they've vetted. So the technology and tools have given us more ability to have transparency into who those people are, where they exist, and even what the pricing, the pay rates are for that, which creates a more equitable market overall, sort of balanced instead of it just being all the company's control or all the control of those individuals. But definitely, same as you, I'm seeing this rise in people that are doing fractional work. And I don't know, I don't have the data to say this is definitely a trend that's taking off and it's different now. I don't know if that's different or if it's just we're calling it that, so it's a little more defined than it was before when someone said, hey, I'm working part-time as a marketing leader for a small company for 20 hours a month.
Yeah.
They may not call it fractional, but it was essentially in what we're talking about here. And at the same time, reflecting, I was talking to a leader, someone that I knew recently. She left. She's doing some supposed to be fractional, very strategic executive level work. But she says, when I show up, that the CEO is like, here, I need you to write this marketing campaign. She's like, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. Yeah, but you're on contract. You've got the hours. So get started. So she's like, I'm doing this executive stuff mixed in with everything else. So some of the fractional things we're hearing about may not be that only the executive advisory, but maybe a mix of other stuff. And it's just a catch-all for we have someone working with us for a part-time basis, contributing, and we're going to give them the work that seems fitting to their function, whether it's their level or not.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I also wonder if it's not just a factor of organizations needing to cut costs and looking at the organization and saying, do we really need to pay somebody to be a chief, whatever, in this case, HR, or can we get away with having somebody who has that skill set, but only drops in to sort of give us guidance, and then we can have the team be lower comped and, they can kind of run and execute everything. I think there are organizations out there, especially on the smaller end or developing end, that are, trying to be more efficient that way too.
I talked to the number one country club in the Houston area, their COO recently, and that's exactly what he told me.
Yeah.
He said, we use this HR outsourcing partner. They do all the strategic stuff. They help us with those things. On staff, we have someone that pulls together timesheets and stuff or payroll, someone that helps with HRBP, employee questions, things like that. But other strategic stuff, they're handling it. And for us, it's more predictable.
Yeah.
It's less expensive than having that person in-house. And we get that backstop of all their accumulated knowledge, not just whatever that one person has that we brought in for the team. Yeah. So there's a tug of war on that a little bit too, like some of the other things we talked about, where some kind of say, no, it's more important to us to have a point person who is full-time, but it could be a trend that direction where companies say, we don't need all of that. We need this much of strategy, and the rest of it's just doing.
Yeah.
We need a doer to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Let's go back to the organizations. Organizations will need to staff up, and the market for talent is getting tougher across industries, as you've explained. And so even if they want to revamp how they do their work, they're going to have to compete in a tougher market. How do you see the most thoughtful or progressive or innovative companies shifting hiring, marketing those positions, where they're going, who they're bringing in, how they're onboarding, the skills they're looking for? Like, how do you see that evolving?
So I'll give you a quick, for anyone listening in that wants some good practical takeaways and not just Ben's thoughts on the world, here's a couple. I'll give you, 4 or 5 really quick ones that come from the data we have. So some things that companies can do to meet the needs of candidates that they're asking for in the research. So number one, when we ask candidates, we give them in our research, we did some experimentation recently and said, here's different job ads. Which job would you want to apply for? And the job ads are completely the same, except for the very bottom of them, there's a line that says, we're a market leader in this industry. And the other one says, this is the impact you'll have if you work here. And probably no surprise that second one gets twice the applies as that first one, even before they know who the company is. They just know a job title and that little bit about it. And it comes down to impact over industry. So when you're thinking about how to market, promote your jobs, make sure you're talking about the impact they'll have, not just the industry you're in or the work you do. We get caught up in that in HR and recruiting. So we think about that stuff as what we're steeped in, but take a step deeper into, if you work here, here's the result that you'll have on the world. And people want to know more about those type of roles. That costs us nothing, by the way. It fits in every budget. Number 2, we talked about transparency before, and that fits here too. So not just compensation transparency, which has become a bigger issue, both legally, states requiring that, but also just a best practice. There are other areas of transparency that matter. So when you ask candidates what matters, number one is pay. Number two, development opportunities. What sort of growth path is here? Am I going to be in another dead end job, or are you going to help me be more than I was when I started? What does the process look like here? I'm trying to get a job. Are there 17 steps in the hiring process? Don't surprise me with those things. I shouldn't finish an interview and think I'm done at the finish line. You're like, oh yeah, you got to come back next week again and meet someone else. So help them know what that looks like. And last but not least, what is the culture like? What does it feel like to work here? When I show up, what's the atmosphere? What's the mood? What's the emotions around this? Like, tell me, understand those things, because that matters.
Yeah. The other element to that, just to interrupt on that, is just take a second to think about what your process is and see if you can make it more human.
We're not getting into rocket science here, Brian. Come on.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I just think it's a good cursory test of like, how many steps? What do they have to do? What are we about to put this person through? Do we need all of this? Can we make this a better experience for the person? Just if you just ask yourself that question, looking at that whole thing, like one or two tweaks can make a big difference, a big positive impact on somebody.
I had a chance to talk to Sarah Falpell. She is at Enterprise Mobility, and she helps with all of their IT hiring. And one of the things that she said her biggest accomplishment in the past year is she said, I got our managers to let go of controlling their own unique little hiring process in favor of a standardized one, because, not again, benefits, right? Because we're hiring so much faster now, because we're not doing all these unique processes that can take time, but we have one process, it's standardized, everyone weighed in on it. We created this uniform approach, and we're hiring faster as a result. So they're getting those candidates they wanted. In some cases, we're losing because it took so long. We're now getting them, and that's why they're willing to give that up. So to your point, they said, let's look at these things. Let's give a little to get a little, and it's worked out better across the board.
Yeah. What about going to new talent pools?
Yeah. So a couple of things there. There was a study in Harvard a while back that said there's what they call a hidden labor market. This hidden labor force could be up to tens of millions of people that don't show up when someone goes and searches a database, a resume database, LinkedIn. They're not there, but they're available to work. They're capable. They're qualified if companies would just tap them on the shoulder. And so in the book, I write about companies like Hot Chicken Takeover. They're a restaurant. They're based in Ohio, and they do a lot of fair chance hiring. They consider candidates that other companies completely turn away because they say these people are loyal. They need a chance. They're trying to get back to work, and they're giving them an opportunity to start contributing back to society and earning money to take care of themselves and their families when other companies are turning them away.
Is this like convicts, like ex-cons and felons like that kind of thing?
Yes. Someone who has a criminal record to some degree and comes there looking for work, and they'll give them a chance when no one else will. I was talking with I've been 2 years ago now. I was talking with one of the leaders in South Dakota who supports that at a state level. And he said, we have these manufacturing companies that are saying, we can't find anybody. We have unfilled roles. We have machines sitting, not running. We're not at full productivity. And he said, well, have you thought about this? Like, well, we can't do that.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this person isn't, taking care of a classroom of children or something. They're just running a machine in here. And, why are you saying no? Do you really want to borrow a point earlier, what are you willing to bend on? Because if you don't bend, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. You've got to change something in there. There's a company in the book that I wrote about that I love. They're so cool, called Televerde. And let's say you pick up the phone and you call service because your Dell computer's acting up, and the person answers says, hey, this is Mary with Dell. What can I do for you? If Dell is working with Televerde for their outsourced call center, the chances are high that Mary is currently incarcerated somewhere within the U.S. They'll go into a prison, they'll set up a call center, and they'll allow these women to start earning money, working, contributing back to society, reminding them they have valuable skills to offer the world, and they start saving up. So when they transition out, if they paid their debt to society, they get a chance to start their life anew instead of starting cold with, okay, what skills do I have?
Yeah.
No, last week I was doing a job, I was getting paid for it, and I can go and find another job like that and continue on that path. And so they're giving people a different a different look at life, a different set of value there. And it excites me. So like those people, most companies never even consider them in their search. Yeah. And that's a talent pool that is available, that's willing to work and is incredibly loyal by all the data we have says that group, if you give them a shot, is highly loyal because so many others will not.
Well, and I imagine back to my comment about like leveling up, to do that effectively just requires you to maybe do a little bit of research on what that group is really looking for and how to give them what they need, and not just being like, all right, let's open the door. Oh, is this working? No, it's not working. Get out of here. Let's give those people what they need. Let's be better leaders of those types of people. Let's help them integrate into the workforce. It takes upfront research and thought, but once you put in that little bit of effort, it's not a huge lift to upskill yourself as a people leader to do that, but it takes effort.
Yes. Well, we are always weighing risk in our minds. A good HR leader never completely disregards what the risk is of a decision. And so decisions like that feel like they are risky. But in the example I gave of the manufacturing companies, the risk of lost profits, the risk of, burning out your people you have already on staff and them quitting too. Like there's other risks you start weighing against that. It's not just, well, it'll be terrible or it'll be great, but we're having other variables in this equation that they have to start looking at if they're going to make that decision.
Yeah. So I've interviewed a gentleman named Lauren Nordgren twice on the podcast, actually. And he has a great book called The Human Element. And it's all about why great ideas don't land and what you can do about it. He coins the term in that friction theory. And the concept is that when a bullet comes out of a rifle aimed at a target, it needs gunpowder to hit that target, but it also needs aerodynamics, right? The bullet has to spin so that it can cut through the air, because as soon as it comes out of the barrel, it is facing the friction of the air. And that is what will pull it off course or stop it before it hits the target. Our ideas are the same. As soon as they come out of our mouths, people are reacting to those ideas. One of them is they're doing a risk assessment. Another one is just inertia, right? It's new. We haven't done it that way. The way we've done it has kind of worked. There's that inertia. I'm going to blank on the other two for the moment, but that's a great book too, just to think about the fact that these ideas are great. And it's not that they're bad ideas. It's just that we have to work through our own thought process of human behavior that resists kind of any new good idea.
Absolutely. It's part of who we are as humans. Our brains are made to assume there's danger. They're wired to look for things that could be risky to us. And thankfully today, we're probably not walking around thinking, is there a tiger behind that bush over there? Most of us don't have that rational fear. If you have that fear, you probably got some other challenges. Go get some help there. But if you are looking at a bush, they're like, that's probably not that kind of fear. It's, if I bring an idea up at work, is O'Brien going to steal it? Is he going to take credit for that? If I bring up an idea, is he going to shut it down and make me look foolish in front of everybody in the meeting? That's the sort of things that happen all the time.
Well, it goes back to psychological safety, right? Which is just one of those grounding principles that we need in order to have an effective workplace.
When I worked as an HR leader at the last company I was working at, incredible culture, amazing leadership, we had this thing. It was very grandiose. It was called the Big Ideas Database. I feel like that needs to be spelled like capital letters when I say it out loud.
Yeah.
It was a SharePoint site for submitting ideas. And some of the stuff in there was just dumb. By all standards, it was dumb. Like, we need bigger garbage cans in the kitchen. Okay, sure, whatever. But we had an engineer who said, we're doing this thing every time. And if we would just change it this way when a customer comes in, we would have to rebuild it from scratch. And we could do an annual licensing fee. And her idea became $1 million line of business for the company just because she said, why don't we do this way? And no one had ever stopped to say, yeah, that's great. Try that out.
Yeah.
And so when we think about people raising ideas in the business, we often think of them being negative. Can I tell you the list of problems you have? Where's the suggestion box? But there are always people in our business that are looking at how can we do this better? And we're trading books here. There's a book called The Idea-Driven Organization that says so much innovation comes from the front line, people closest to the customer, closest to the work being done, not someone in a far corner office. It's like, how can we innovate on this process? Because they are not close enough to see all the intricacies and to know that. So if it's 2% better this year and next year another idea 2% better, over time, that stacks and adds value in a powerful way. But we sometimes don't create the culture. We don't create the mechanisms to listen to those ideas. And so we miss out on all the things you want to contribute there.
Well, I mean, the organization I work for, which I've mentioned on here before, Lockton, it's grown in almost 60 years to a $4 billion plus company almost completely organically. And the whole ethos of the founder, Jack Lockton, he would talk about all the time, was that it was a producer-led company, meaning a salespeople-led company, because the salespeople are out talking to their clients, talking to new clients, and they're the first ones who are going to understand where the market is going and what we need to be investing in as a business. And whereas so many other organizations put their salespeople in the back or off to the side, and they're like, well, they're selling, but they're not making business decisions. He said, well, no, these are the people who understand what our customers want. They should be the leaders of the business. And when you come into that role, you are expected to be a leader in the business. That is very clear. And it has created a very unique and powerful culture and financial result because of it.
A company that's willing to do that, though, they take a risk. But they're also, when we avoid the risk of something negative, we also avoid the risk of an incredible upside. Yes. And they took that risk and it paid off. Yeah. It's exciting.
Yeah. Well, and there's always checks, anything without some guardrails can, any strength without some governor can turn into a weakness. And so if that was, in the cases where that runs a little too much amok, we can get into trouble. But with the right controls in place and some oversight to that, you can harness it and it can be really, really powerful. So yeah, I'm a firm believer, as I've said on the show before, that the answer is almost always in the middle. I actually had a gentleman on, Brian Emerson, who talks about and teaches on polarities, this concept that we're tuned to black and white thinking, and that we see these things that seem to be competitive in nature or seem to be competing ideas that are actually complementary ideas. And to be most successful, we need to navigate between them, not wrap around one or the other. And I nerded out with him because I just so firmly believe that to be true. Every time I look at a situation, it's like, well, do you need this or do you need this? And it's almost always, well, we need a version of both. And you just have to figure that out.
So I'm both overjoyed to hear that and distraught at hearing that. One of the ideas for a book that I want to write is called The Third Option. Because so often we have, well, my choice is either to go and work, 80 hours a week and never see my kids, or, see my kids when they starve to death.
Yeah.
No, actually the answer is go find a company that cares about you. You work 40 hours and you take care of your whole family. Like there's a middle ground there in that. There's more options than just two. It's 3, 4, 5, 6 options. And I want to write that book. And now I'm like, well, now I've got to find a different way to approach that, because I've got his book already up in a tab over here to go and get, because that sounds like it's right up my alley.
There you go. Well, that message should be and needs to be preached in many more angles. So I hope you do write a book about that, because I think the more takes we have on that concept, the better we all get, especially having gone through a period of time recently that has been very polarized.
Yes.
Yeah. What you were talking about before, there's an element there where that kind of bridges both of these things that we're talking about. Like if you are thinking critically about the work that you're doing and about how you're going to approach work, you're going to both change your hiring process and change how the work gets done. Mm-hmm. How do you see organizations embracing this as part of the culture? Like, this is something that just needs to be woven into the fabric of the culture. It just needs to be the way people think and operate. How do you see the companies that are doing this well? Like, how are they doing that? How are they talking about, what do their conversations sound like? That kind of thing.
I think it comes down to this concept of flexibility. And it's one of those things that everybody talks about, but everybody means something a little different when they say it. And that spurred me to ask this question in the research, where I asked the workforce, what does flexibility mean to you? Because when we say it as HR leaders, we almost always mean the context of where you're working, right? Are you remote? Are you hybrid? Are you in person? That's what we think of flexibility. But when you ask the workforce what flexibility means, it's flexibility in when I work. It's flexibility in how I work. It's flexibility in being able to raise ideas to our leaders like we were talking about. It's flexibility in the benefits that I have access to. It's flexibility in when or how I get paid. Those sorts of things matter to them, not just where they work. And going back to this bigger conversation, again, that's a risk. That takes effort, or pulling from these other threads in the conversation today. But those things create incredible outcomes when we're actually willing to lean into that, because we're telling each person that we work with, every single employee at the company, we're not saying, I know you're a carbon copy of this one over there, and so you want all the exact same things. We're not making those assumptions. We're saying what matters to you and how can we meet that for you. And the thing that I've realized more and more over time is if you ask any business leader, does flexibility matter to you, to your workforce? Is it a priority for your company? Yes. At a policy level, almost everyone is on board with that. But as it gets closer to that manager and that employee relationship, it either works or it completely falls apart at that relationship level. So flexibility or DEI or work-life balance or any number of these things that are big conversations that are happening, they're easy at a policy level almost, but they're really hard at a relationship level because everyone has those different expectations, different assumptions, well, this is the way we've always done it. And that sort of thing, again, pointing back to the communication piece earlier, people, as much as we would love for them to be good at it, they're not always great at communicating those things, making sure they're clear. And that creates friction and problems and challenges.
And in fact, we're usually pretty bad at it.
Speak for yourself. No, I was telling someone the other day, like I still have not realized my wife cannot read my mind and I can't read hers after 17 years of marriage. Like I should figure that out at some point. And yet every day is a new challenge for me to remember that and to try to overcome that with how I'm getting.
I work with a leadership development coach and he says, leadership isn't educating, leadership is reminding. It's like people just forget and you have to continue to communicate and continue to remind people, why are we doing what we're doing, the impact it's having, where we're going, like all the decisions, like you almost can't over communicate.
Okay. So are you familiar with the forgetting curve?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So you're going to enjoy this. So you and I both love.
Let's nerd out. This is right up my alley.
So this researcher, this German psychologist years ago discovered this, and it's been proven through other studies since then. But they wanted to understand how your retention of things persists, or declines over time. What they found was when we teach someone something, we give them information, about half of that goes away within as short as an hour. 70% of what we told them within 24 hours. And then, it steadily dwindles down if they're not reminded, or if they're not having a chance to try it out or connect it in. It's often talked about in the context of the learning space. If I train you, if I spend $1 million in this training and you forget half of it in a week, that's $500,000 down the drain. So how do we make sure you don't forget? But this also applies in this context. When as a leader, I say something, I assume everybody heard it the first time, but I shouldn't assume that. I should say it again because it's that important. And by the way, I should bring up another example. So I'm not saying it the same way. I'm saying it a different way, but I'm giving you an example of how that looks and trying to make sure that's woven back in. The best leaders do that over and over again to the point where it's almost, okay, here it comes. There it is. I knew it was coming.
Yeah.
And that's becoming that clear about it. You never have to wonder, are we on the same page or not? So the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve just tells us we forget so much of what comes at us in a daily basis. Some of it's okay. It's our brain's way of wiping away the slate, things we don't need to remember. But there are other things we do need to remember. And if we're not finding a way to reinforce those, then people will not be able to keep them in their operating memory when they're making a decision day to day.
Well, I studied mass media in college. I was a communications major, and there's the rule of three that people don't even recognize that they've seen a message until they've seen it at least 3 times. And they don't actually understand the message until they've seen it at least 7 times. And so like the good rule of thumb is about the time that you're getting sick of saying the thing that you're saying over and over and over again is about the time people are starting to hear it.
Oh, yeah. They finally catch on. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, which is why, because people go like, well, I've said this before. And it's like, you got to say it again. You got to say it all the time. And again, back to the organization that I work for. I mean, no organization is perfect, but cultural wise, they've done a great job at perpetuating this culture. Our founder died, I think, almost over 20 years ago. And he's like, I said that to somebody the other day and they were like, God, I would have thought he died 2 years ago. Like the presence is still so large. And it's because at every opportunity, like multiple times per year in emails, in videos, at internal conferences and meetings, various different executives and leaders are talking about what it means to work there and what we stand for and what our founder believed in and all that. And it's just pumped into everybody. And it does create sort of everybody swimming in the same direction.
I use the metaphor. I don't know if you've ever seen a dragon boat race before. Yes. But it's hilarious. It's a bunch of untrained people, usually for a charity event, like getting in a boat and trying to row together. And it's hilariously terrible. And I've done it a couple of times. They try to get everyone on the same pace, but it's hard. You got 12 people in a boat paddling, and they don't do this as a day-to-day activity. And like you start paddling, you at the wrong pace, and it just slows everything down instead of speeding it up. Even with everyone paddling, if you don't hit the water at the same time, then you're dragging. And so that's the sort of thing I picture is if we're not doing this, we end up with that sort of outcome where even if we're trying to generally go in the same direction, if it's not in sync, if we're not aligned, then it's going to be less efficient, less effective, and it won't go as far as we're hoping it would.
Yeah. I have one more recruiting question for you. I wanted to ask this earlier, but couldn't quite fit it in. So I'm going to force it in here at the end. Back to economics. There's a great chapter in Freakonomics called Teach the Garden to Weed Itself. Mm-hmm. And it's all about how to set up a process so that people who aren't good for you opt out of that process. Are you familiar with that chapter at all?
I am not. I'm a big Freakonomics fan, but I've got the idea. I think I'm picturing where you're going with this.
Yeah. And so my question is like, because I was thinking as you were talking about putting the little line at the bottom of the job description that was, hey, we're a leading company versus here's the impact we're making. And they got double the applicants. What I have heard from some hiring managers is like getting applicants isn't the problem. Getting qualified applicants is the problem. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious if you see any leading organizations doing anything different in how they are marketing themselves so that they are drawing in things or people that are qualified and sort of not forcing, but like creating some kind of self-weeding mechanism so that the people who aren't good fits are not applying.
So the technology around applying for jobs has gotten easier. And because of that, the unintended side effect of that is that anyone can apply for another job immediately, pretty much for free. And not only that, but you and I could spend the next half hour talking about all of the creepy ways that companies are now selling things to candidates to allow them to automatically apply for jobs, to allow them to fake video interviews, to allow them to do these things and skirt all the process we put in place to screen for a good candidate. So even if we get the right one, and if someone in that looks good, looks qualified, we put them through the screening process, they may still not be a good hire. It's hard to get them out once we get them in. And the ways they're cheating that are real. One of the things I'll say in that is, yes, I talked to some companies in some of the examples I gave earlier. The healthcare companies would give anything to have nurses applying for their jobs. So some of those are very scarce. Others are like, we post a job and we got too many. We got to close the job at 250 applicants because we can't even look at all of those.
Yeah.
How do we get them through there? One of the things in the research that really stands out there is more companies are leaning on things like assessments, automated video interviews, things like that to allow them to screen more people at once and to get an additional layer. That assessment gives me a layer of insight into that person beyond just how well they prep for the interview or how well they answer questions. Because I'm a great interviewer, but might not be good at whatever that job is.
Yeah.
And other people get nervous, get worried, don't do it well in the interview, but they could perfectly well do that job that you're hiring for. And so more and more companies are looking at how do we put them through the paces of what this job would require and judge them based on that, not based on how well ChatGPT wrote the resume, not based on how well they do this other thing, but how they do that. And there's been some backlash in the candidate community in recent years. Some of the neuroscience games, you'll call them that, the assessments are like popping balloons and stuff like that. And like, this has nothing to do with the actual job. I don't see a line of sight there. What we see in the research is a candidate is still okay with not being picked for a job if the assessment experience is aligned to what they would be doing in the job. Because at least then, Ben is picked based on putting his best foot forward, not picked based on a resume or a cover letter or something else irrelevant, or my name even. The research shows there's a lot of bias even in someone's name that could cause them to lose out on the job, even if they're perfectly qualified otherwise.
Yeah.
So getting past that too, let's see what you're about, what you can do, and judging based on that. That's what candidates actually prefer and are looking for. Strangely, at the same time, companies are like, we want to add any friction to the hiring process. We don't make this harder. And so I'm having that same conversation you're having, trying to reconcile those two different things that seem to be at odds with each other every day.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. All right. Well, this has been fascinating. I appreciate you coming on the show, and I'm glad we were able to make it happen after so long. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you were like, oh my gosh, employers need to be thinking about this?
I think the only other thing that you and I didn't talk about that's been a top of mind thing for me lately, it's not really a talent scarcity piece, but it's on the AI side a little bit. There's a study that came out from the University of Toronto recently, and some others have started producing this kind of research that says people that are using these tools like ChatGPT and others are less creative after they use them. Once you've used it, it takes away some of that creativity you have. And I would challenge, strangely, I talk a lot about this. I teach on this. So I'm trying to figure out where I land on that spectrum.
Yeah.
But for anyone listening in there, if you're one of those people that uses this every day for lots of different tasks, can you afford to be less creative, less innovative in your job? Many of us can't. So you need to find out how to start thinking through that carefully about where and when to use those things and when not to, because if it's generating new ideas and trying to be creative from scratch, it's just pulling from stuff that's out there. It's not generating anything new. You could come up with better ideas, but you're going to have to put in the effort. There's that E word again for us today. So that's just one last thing to bring some interesting challenge to everybody that's out there, maybe on autopilot doing those things, and to challenge you to think differently about that.
Yeah. Isn't that?
I'm not the doom cloud guy, and I don't mean like, I want to challenge you in a, again, positive way.
Yeah.
Use that brain you've got to do good work. You did good work up until 2 years ago. Don't outsource thinking and being creative, because creativity, critical thinking, curiosity, those are three of the core human skills that you cannot automate with algorithms and AI. Yeah. So if you get rid of that ability to be creative, you're giving more opportunity for your job to be automated in the future. That's the way I look at it.
I mean, hard things. It's so funny because we all want to get out of doing hard things, but doing hard things is what makes us capable of doing harder things.
Yes.
And so much of life is being able to do hard things. And so, I think that's a much broader conversation. Maybe that'll be round 2, is how do we get society to embrace continuing to do hard things? Well,
you're a workout guy, right? You like working out. And if you were going to go over there and do pull-ups and like, hold on, let me give you, I'll help you up. Like, you're not going to get stronger. You're not getting the muscle built that you need to. And I use that metaphor for muscle building in a lot of different ways. Creativity is a muscle in others. So
absolutely.
You can't give that up.
Yeah. Any skill is that way. Mm-hmm. If you're using something to supplement what you're doing, then you're not really developing that skill. And now that's not to say that you can't get any help anywhere. There are plenty of tools out there that make life more efficient, that are great, and they're worth the trade-off, and it's awesome. But there are trade-offs to using those tools. So all right. You've got me thinking now at the end of this here. I'm going to go have some lunch and noodle on that. Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show. Everybody out there, I hope this has helped you think differently and a little bit more proactively about how you approach your work and the people that you're trying to bring on board to help do it with you. So best of luck to everybody out there.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.